It's actually the subject of a very big party divide. The Labour Party in general want tighter rules. The Conservative Party, most of the outside earnings going to Tory MPs, 15 of the 17 million.
Don't you think that's a bit weird that somehow it's one specific party that gets the vast majority of their donations from corporations, right, who want fewer rules, and another party who get most of their donations from the union movement want more rules? So Sky News have done a journalism, I know, crazy, right? An actual journalistic outfit in this country doing its job correctly. And what they've done is they have, by doing their job correctly, I mean, have taken freely available information about donations and collated it into what they've called the Westminster Files. As if they've done some kind of investigative journalism, but really they've just collated some readily available information, which, to be fair, that basic level of journalism is way above what all of the other journalistic outfits have done in this country. So the fact that I am giving this admiration just shows the level of how pathetic the press is in this country. But I digress. Nevertheless, they have released all of this information to the public, so it's available and collated for them to view, which is good. Transparency in politics is a good thing. There has been I think they released a list of the 20 MPs who've had the most donations from private individuals or from private companies or from unions or whatever. And the most donated to, 17 of the top 20 are all Tories. And then there's 2 Labour in Jess Phillips and David Lammy. And then last on the list is 1 MP from Sinn Féin, which is weird because they don't take their seats. Anyway, this morning, or it might have been yesterday morning actually on Sky News, they did a big segment about it, about who's paying MPs for other jobs, whether MPs should have second jobs, and also going over the data. So we're going to have a watch it, and then we'll be able to have a look into that and see what conclusions we can draw. So let's go.
So let's turn our attention to the main reason we're here in the Houses of Parliament tonight. Trades unions, the state of Qatar, and a little-known business in Hertfordshire are among those who have given most to individual MPs since the last general election. Sky News and Tortoise Media have launched the Westminster Accounts, a major project designed to shine a light on how money flows into politics. Now we can reveal for the first...
But why now? Why not 5 years ago?
...time all the money, the payments and gifts, external organisations and individuals have donated to MPs since the end of 2019. It's all legal and all the information has been publicly, properly declared. But as a result of today's revelations, MPs have been accused of failing to provide sufficient transparency after our investigation struggled to uncover basic details about who is behind some major donations. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has this exclusive report.
The Westminster Accounts, a new way to follow the money through our political system, giving you the chance to track your MP and who gives to them. Yesterday, we revealed which MPs earn the most from second jobs and triggered calls for change.
The more transparency, the better.
Today, the men, women and businesses who put their money into Westminster. Too long, just part of the Punch and Judy of our politics.
They're paid by the union barons and they're proud of it.
The simple truth is that they are the party for the tax dodgers, not the taxpayers.
But the reality of who gives to our MPs is far more complex.
Things that they always say, oh, like the Labour Party are paid by the unions. Oh, well done, mate. News at 11.
And the game playing suggests.
Tracing the network of donors to MPs in Parliament has never been easy. Links have long been obscured in a system that was never designed to be properly analysed. Now, here's something you genuinely haven't been able to do before. You might recognise these names. They're the top donors to political parties, 4 big unions who've given over £21 million to Labour, wealthy individuals, Lord Sainsbury and JC Bamford, who opened their chequebooks for the Lib Dems and the Conservative Party. But this is what we've never been able to show you. Here is who's been giving the most cash and support to individual MPs over this Parliament, so since December 2019. Again, some names you recognise. 2 of the biggest unions are the biggest donors, Unite and GMB, with some of the biggest sums going to Labour MPs on the left of the party. In fact, over half of Unite's £600,000 of donations to individuals go to just 3 Labour MPs, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Richard Bergen and Barry Gardiner. But then this becomes a story about what we don't know.
Because the thing is that this is all just incredibly transparent, right? It's incredibly transparent how unions have always funded the Labour Party. They were the people who created the Labour Party to have a voice in Parliament in the first place, which is why it's so ridiculous that corporate members like Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper and Wes Streeting have so much power in the party now as political careerists because they don't properly have the links to the union movement that everyone else does in the party currently. But that's always been the case, right? It's never not been the case. Everyone knows it. Everyone understands this. They've all been incredibly transparent, and the unions donating to the Labour Party or Labour Party candidates are based off the back of a democratic mandate that they have within their own unions. It's just working people putting their money there in the end of the day.
And to tell it, we're going to focus on two companies in this list. The third biggest donor to MPs in this Parliament is a little-known entity, a Hertfordshire business called MPM Connect. They give well...
And the thing as well is, right, is that even under the rules that we have, the scrutiny that we're putting on people isn't scrutiny off the basis of the fact that the donations are happening, but it's about what people would be getting back for those donations, right? What people are going to be getting in policy concessions by supporting these candidates specifically, right? And that's where the criticism comes from. Well, I don't really care about union donations because at the end of the day, it's going to be in the interests of the workers who are represented by the union. Whereas if it's from an individual or a corporation, then that is going to have to come with some serious policy concessions. That's why a lot of people will say, and they'll watch this segment and they'll go, but no, Justice, why are you putting so much scrutiny off the Labour MPs when the Conservatives are the ones who get donated the most? I'm like, well, first of all, it's open knowledge that the Conservatives get all their money from donations from private individuals because, again, that's who they're there to support. Because at the end of the day, it is politics is going to be, in some way, a battle of interests, right? The interests of working people against the interests of corporations, because, as any good Marxist will tell you, these interests are diametrically opposed, right? There is no happy-go-lucky, linking arms, jollying off into the sunset society that people will tell you that exists, right? The relationship between businesses and their employees is combative and it is, at the end of the day, in conflict because their interests are diametrically opposed. They want to pay you as less as possible to maximise profit, and workers want to make as much money as they can in wages, impacting the profits of the business that they work for. That's a very simple fact about how capitalism operates. And so, naturally, there will also be some level of dual power within the ways in which the state will operate. And there will be some parties who will fight for the needs of the workers half of that particular conflict, and there'll be some people who fight for the employers. So when you have a specific party like the Labour Party, who exists to fight for workers specifically, who are then getting donations from people who, at the end of the day, have a combative relationship with people who do work and who are working people, that's when you have to have some level of scrutiny as to what concessions they're getting and how that's going to affect the MPs who are supposed to be there fighting for the needs of working people at the end of the day, right? I'm not saying that every donation from some private individual to the Labour Party is bad in and of itself, right? But when you have, for example, you look at these three MPs, you look at Yvette Cooper and Wes Streeting specifically. Yvette Cooper and Wes Streeting, both people who are on the front bench. Yvette Cooper, somebody who got £75,000 from the person who runs MPM Connect, Peter Hearn, for her leadership bid of the Labour Party in 2015, right? This is hardly happening in a vacuum. It's not just people donating to politicians that they like. They're donating to politicians who are going to fight in their interests. And I dare say the leader of a recruitment of many recruitment firms, 25 or so to say truth, in the form of Peter Hearn, he is not doing this for his own benefit, right? He is doing this to be able to get policy concessions. And they're going to be against, for example, the needs of what workers are going to be because he's the director of these companies who wants to turn a profit. Are we at least better than the Americans on this? 100%, massively so than the Americans.
Over £250,000 to just three well-known Labour MPs, Yvette Cooper, Dan Jarvis and Wes Streeting.
Such a big donor, so little information. A company, but it's not clear what it does or where it gets its money. It has no website, its accounts say there are no employees, 2 directors are listed, but no public route to contact the company itself.
We just wanted to understand who was behind the donations and why they gave the money. So we asked the MPs themselves. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, who received a donation of £180,000 from the company. Her office gave us a statement they said was not to be quoted. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting said everything was declared in the proper way. Dan Jarvis said all of his...
It's worth noting that after this programme was broadcast, Yvette Cooper did come out and say that it was Peter Hearn who was in charge, who has donated before, he's donated to Labour candidates for a long time, and that it was within the rules, right? So it's been retracted from being no comment to a full comment from Yvette Cooper, worth putting that out there for transparency.
His donations support his work as an MP, not the answers to the questions that we hope for.
So we travelled to Hertfordshire to the company's registered address.
Hello there, I'm from Sky News. We're trying to get in touch with people from MPM Connect. This is the address for MPM Connect. Peter Hearn or Simon Murphy. Do you know whether I can speak to them or how I can contact them?
No.
Do you recognise the names I'm talking about? You look confused. Have you heard of MPM Connect?
Accountants.
Yes, have you heard of MPM Connect?
No.
You haven't heard of MPM Connect? It's registered addresses here. Have you heard?
This is obviously a stunt, right? And it does lay some light into what's happening here. But if you actually look at this particular address, right? So this MPM Connect is registered at this one I'm looking for. It's registered at 4 Grenville Avenue, which is a place called Grenville House, which is this building on the left here, right? If you look at Companies House and you look at BizStats, for example, there are 368 companies registered at this address alone, right? Let me type that in the postcode here. Records per page 50, right? Let me pull that down so you can see. So I'm searching EN10, right? Search. All of these, Grenville House 4, Grenville Avenue. This is just the A's, right? There's 8 pages of this stuff, of 50 results per page, plus an extra 18. There's 368 companies located at this address, in 368 companies in this little fucking building here. What's going on? It looks like a closed down chip shop. It absolutely does, right? There's obviously all a bunch of shell companies. But it just shows that there is something dodgy going on here. And if you look at Peter Hearn here as well, like, these are the companies that he has been a director of for the past kind of 25 years or so, including the active ones here. Some of these are active, some of them aren't. Most of them are all recruitment agencies, which is interesting. If you, for example, are a party who are looking to be coming into government pretty soon, who might need to hire private contracts to be able to recruit people for public sector workers, maybe if you're paying a bunch of money to future cabinet members, you might be able to get a little bit of money on the side to be able to be the person who does the recruiting for the public sector. Maybe he's getting something in return. I can't say. I would like to point out, just for full transparency, I do not know that this is concessions that he's going to get. But you have to imagine, if he's going to be giving some of his own money, he would want to be getting something similar in return for all of this, right? Also, if you're a director of this many companies, right? All the ones that say active next to him, he's director of all of these companies right now, then maybe, right? Maybe being a director of a company is not something that is particularly taxing. It must be a piece of piss to be a director of this many companies at once.
Heard of Peter Hearn or Simon Murphy, the 2 directors for MPM Connect, who's registered here? Yes, we're from Sky News. We're trying to find out more about MPM Connect. Yes. But you said you haven't heard of MPM Connect. But why not? We're just trying to find out.
I don't believe so, 255. Landlords do this too. When I've checked who owns the building, on some of them it goes to some business that when you look at them up, they're like, well, nothing. Yeah, exactly. It's all done through a bunch of shell companies and brass plate companies. Yeah.
About MPM Connect. Okay, so there we have 2 individuals in there who say that they haven't heard of Peter Hearn, of MPM Connect, and shut the door when we ask more questions.
No light being shed here. Just an accountant's firm where hundreds of companies have registered themselves. This all completely permitted under a system that allows firms as well as people to donate.
And this is where liberals just kind of break down, right? They say, well, if it's within the rules, then it's okay. And I'm like, no, the rules are bad, right? Give me a normative statement about what's going on here, rather than just hand-wringing and going, oh, well, actually, it's just within the rules, so you can't really blame them. Well, yes, you can, right? Is it right or wrong? I don't care whether you can describe to me whether or not the rules permit it or not. Should they be allowed to do this or not? Like, if it's within the rules and they're doing it, but it's bad, then you can still call that shit out.
But makes answers hard to reach. All a question of transparency, and bigger than one company or one party.
There are examples in this leaderboard where the data alone presents us with a straight-up mystery. Here is the case of IX Wireless. Why would 24 MPs, all Northern Tories, each be handed between £2,000 and £9,000 from a small, little-known Northern broadband company? Why would they do it? And who's behind it?
Why? I can't. But I mean, you have to imagine that they think the people who are watching this are idiots. It's incredibly obvious why a wireless broadband company would want to do that, especially in a particular industry, which is a natural monopoly, like, for example, broadband. Where already we have parts of the country just divvied up between broadband providers because it's incredibly difficult to actually compete in an industry such as broadband provision because the startup costs are so high. When you have the ability to be able to buy out MPs, to be able to give you favourable conditions, to be able to actually build in those areas and have the infrastructure available to provide these wireless, right? What competition do you have? PlusNet and like Sky Broadband, maybe some Virgin Media. That's really it, to be honest. And if you have, and even though it's wireless, it's a wireless broadband provider, so it's all about having access to be able to have the access to the permission to build the infrastructure to be able to provide the infrastructure in the first place to be able to actually provide this stuff. So it's very obvious why they would be donating. So they get favourable conditions to have access to the infrastructure. Hey Morton, how you doing? Thank you for the resub. Welcome to No Justice Stream. Hope you're doing well.
New beginning, a new dawn, a new horizon.
Glossy promotional videos promise a network for everyone, and IX Wireless have won high-profile support from government. Then Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden appearing next to founder Tahir Missan for the first
and previous Secretary of the Tory Party, I believe.
Blackburn launch.
It really is going to provide some of the fastest broadband speeds on the planet to tens of thousands.
And he's literally reading off a script underneath, going, "They will also be providing. I heartily endorse this event or product."
People across the Northwest.
Not all locals were as impressed as the government minister, many angry at the sudden appearance of large poles put up by IX Wireless in their neighbourhoods. The company's website, its accounts, phone calls to IX Wireless and its sister company 6G Internet, based at the same address, offered few clues why the firm should be donating in this way.
We've hit a bit of a brick wall because they say it's company policy not to hand the media the email address for the press office. So we're just going to have to knock on the door.
Yeah, that's definitely going to look incredibly dodgy when you're like, we don't want to be scrutinised, so we're just going to ignore, we're just going to stop letting anybody engage in any scrutiny.
There's nothing identifying any company whatsoever. The floor looks pretty damp. There's really no sign of life. It doesn't look like there has been for some time.
Unfortunately, 255, since you bought the subscription for Pol Pot, he has not turned up, and neither has any other members of the Communist Party of Kampuchea.
No answers, so I called the number on their website. They immediately confirmed this was the right address.
I'm calling from Sky News. My name's Sam Coates. I'm just trying to get in touch with somebody from IX Wireless to answer our questions. I'm actually standing outside Ribble House, and there doesn't seem to be anybody here.
She sounded unsure.
Are you inside Ribble House?
She said there will be, and that she'd find someone to answer my questions, then put me on hold.
Thank you for holding.
After a while, I was told there was nobody who could talk to me.
Is anyone in there? Does anyone work in there?
No answer. She asked me for my details and said someone would be in touch. The call never came. 24 Conservative MPs have accepted donations from IX Wireless. One has since defected to the Labour Party. Christian Wakeford described how he applied for campaign cash to fellow MP and head of the Northern Research Group, Jake Berry. When it arrived a month later, they were told to register it from IX Wireless.
Before you...
Yeah, wouldn't it be really, really good imagination scene if, for example, someone was providing some state broadband service so it could be provided to everybody without the need for a market where competition is incredibly difficult? Wouldn't that be really strange? It's almost like if people were donating to other political parties to stop, for example, a state-run broadband service that might hit their bottom line to be able to make money off of people to sell them a broadband service that would otherwise be being provided free by the state. It's a fucking mystery, isn't it?
It has been an extraordinary...
Good evening, it's fine.
Where were we at? We were at the bit with outside Ribble House, weren't we? Or Christian Wakeford, there we are. Accidentally clicked away there like an idiot.
Wakeford described how he applied for campaign cash to fellow MP and head of the Northern Research Group, Jake Berry. When it arrived a month later, they were told to register it from IX Wireless.
Before you were told that the donation had come from IX Wireless, Had you ever heard of them?
I'd never heard of them, no. Literally the first time I'd ever heard was that email saying this is who you need to put against the register for the donation.
Jake Berry declined to answer what his relationship was with the firm and its founder, Tahir Massan. The Westminster Accounts project was designed to show us who gives.
I love how they just at no point tried to investigate what they would be getting out of this. Like, you had literally the opportunity to speak to an MP who got the campaign funds and didn't actually dig into the actual quid pro quo that was coming from the donation that was being given by IX Wireless. There's another company called 6G Internet that are putting masts everywhere around here. Please tell me it's not the same registered office as fucking NPM Connect. That'd be fucking hilarious. Please tell me, DeWolfie. Don't leave me in suspense.
And help us to understand why. But in some cases, answering those questions is simply not possible. The current system does not make it easy to follow the money, and MPs
Ribble House, also just all in the same place as IX Wireless, yeah.
Can choose to avoid the most basic questions.
I think the basic assumption of most MPs is that if they're following the rules that they've been told to follow, they've made their declarations. But I think there's a bigger question here.
Can you go on BizStats and see if there are other companies also random shell companies registered at Ribble House? Because obviously at Grenville Avenue there was like 368 registered. Actually, fuck it, I'm going to do that now. BB15RB. Let me look at BizStats. Company search. Results per page 50. Postcode BB15RB. Ribble House, Ribble Business Park. That's the one. Okay. Ribble House, Ribble Business Park. First, all 6G. Cohiba Communications. Another communications firm. Interesting. Docs2U. That sounds like a bad name for a company. IX Wireless. Optics Internet. P2P Northwest, Quick Docs Solutions Limited. They're not as many as Grenville House, nowhere near as many, but still a bunch of them. I wonder if you can actually get in contact with these people. This one-year-old company is run by one director, Director Philip W. Other telecommunications activities. Directors details. Strange.
Is that transparency actually sufficient? If an MP is asked for more information, should they feel that actually that is something that they're willing and able to give? Do they actually know the answer to some of these questions if they've taken money from a company that they don't necessarily know how that is funded? I think that's actually quite important.
MPs tell us the rules on donations give us transparency, but just following those rules has left so many questions unanswered and absence of information. The
Just people put the lines in, right, I see. Dark fibre. Cool.
Most important donations go to the most important people who have the biggest sway over our lives. Leaders, past and present, under the spotlight tomorrow as we continue to examine what's in the Westminster Accounts.
We'll be talking to Sam Coates in just a moment, but first the Prime Minister says he fully supports transparency in politics following the launch of the Westminster Accounts investigation. So far, we've revealed for the first time all the money, payments and gifts external organisations and individuals have donated to MPs since the end of 2019. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says it's absolutely right that MPs disclose donations and their outside interests.
I think transparency is really important for the healthy functioning of democracy. It's absolutely right that there's disclosures around donations and outside interests, and transparency is a good thing, and I fully support it.
I mean, Rishi's fine with there being transparency in donations because no one donates to him because he's got fucking plenty of money from his wife.
Is it right that six-figure sums are being given to MPs?
I think transparency is really important, and that's why we have a set of rules and regulations in place to provide that transparency for people, and it's important that those rules are adhered to.
Let's get more then from our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who is here now. Let's talk then specifically about donations. How transparent is that system in reality?
Well, I mean, you watched the film that we played just a few moments ago, and One of the things about our system is that it is perfectly legal, perfectly proper, that individuals should be able to give money through companies. But the question then comes that if MPs say the system is transparent, do we have the right to know, for instance, who is controlling the company, making the donations? Why are they doing that? Can we ask them questions? And that's where we came up against a little bit of a roadblock, because you have people who absolutely...
So 6G are putting in a big Wi-Fi network. The 6G part has nothing to do with the phone network, it's just a marketing gimmick. So instead of having broadband, you'd use their Wi-Fi network instead. It's a terrible idea. That absolutely does sound terrible. That really does. Like, as most broadband networks at the moment, because I know BT do this currently, because they have their Fun network, where they will just allow you to use the internet by connecting to hotspots they have already. Like, I'm with O2 for my mobile. They have loads of O2 hotspots with O2 Wi-Fi across the country. So it feels like that there isn't even a USP for this. Almost like they want to create a USP by buying a bunch of MPs' buying a bunch of MPs to give them some kind of concession and to be able to create a USP out of nowhere. From a software engineering standpoint, that sounds horrifically insecure and icky. Well, yeah, absolutely true, Ling Ling. I mean, it's just another one of those kind of astroturfed tech bro ideas where they try and reinvent the wheel of something that works, but make it worse, but make it look flashy and tech bro style, so people get interested for nothing. Just like with, the Mia Mulder video on what 3 words? When people say capitalism breeds innovation, they don't realise it means this. Well, yeah, true.
Follow the rules, but still you can't really get to the bottom of what's going on, and I think that's the issue that really is at the heart of the film. And there is a bit of breaking news today, Mark, because as you saw in that film, you had donations from a company called MPM Connect to 3 Labour MPs, Yvette Cooper, West Streeting and Dan Jarvis, and we tried in the process of putting that film together to ask them what was going on.
Imagination, but USP stands for unique selling point.
And then essentially we were rebuffed, and Yvette Cooper even gave us a statement that she said wasn't for quoting, and that sounds a bit silly, and in many ways it is, but the point is they didn't really elaborate at all about what was going on. Since that film has started running on Sky News...
I mean, good to have somebody with the expertise in chat, Morton. I appreciate the comments. It's one of those stopgap solutions to a problem that will eventually be solved, like Red Hot and Webber back in the day, before BT finally allowed connections that weren't per minute charged, right, I see.
This morning, in the last couple of hours, all 3 of them have put out a statement that actually do take us quite a lot further. Yvette Cooper, Dan Jarvis and Wes Streeting all reveal that an individual, a businessman called Peter Hearn, is the owner of MPM Connect, that Peter Hearn is behind the donations, and that MPM Connect, they say, completely legitimate company, it's an investment company. So there we have it. Those are the kind of details that we were seeking, that we couldn't get answers to when you knocked on the door.
Investment? It said recruitment on Twitter. I mean, the rest of his businesses are recruitment, so probably a bunch of shell companies all with different links to try and move money around to dodge taxes, but nevertheless.
Of the accountancy firm where that firm is registered, and probably more importantly, when we approach the MPs themselves, one additional detail, Wes Streeting, we understand, went to the same school as Peter Hearn. I think they're slightly different ages, so at different points, but nevertheless there's that link as well. And I think my reflection on this would be, it's sort of taken probably a little bit of public embarrassment to get the MPs to engage with our questions. I suppose I've got a very simple question, which is why couldn't they have done it earlier?
OK, we're going to talk to Chris Bryant about that.
They didn't do it earlier because nobody in the journalism sphere bothered actually investigating this shit before now. We've allowed however many years of this, like, money handed under the table to people to just be a part of, like, our political system for ages. And of course they could never do that before now because there was a genuine threat of a left-wing opposition, right? If they had actually put it to people that there was not even corruption, but there were business and corporate interests in the pockets of both halves of our political faction, whilst there was somebody who was in charge of the left-wing party nominally, who was there to campaign to get money out of politics, that might threaten their access, right? Now that the threat of left-wing government has gone away, suddenly they're happy to do the same thing. It's interesting that this is the second time in like 20 years we've had a proper investigation into money in politics after Cash for Honours. Guess who the main beneficiary of Cash for Honours were? It was the neoliberal Blairite MPs.
In just one moment, but just broadly speaking, the reaction of MPs who've
peers rather
returned to this place today.
So you have the Prime Minister talking about the importance of transparency today, Keir Starmer talking about the importance of transparency yesterday, some other figures perhaps more effusively
well, I mean, expenses was coming out of the public purse. That was about MPs using the system to be greedy, rather than corporate interests changing policy based upon getting favours by paying MPs off for it. So expenses is kind of different in the way that cash for honours and this is.
Who are MPs welcoming the Westminster Accounts. I think it's fair to say that there's been a mixed reaction from parliamentarians themselves. In private, quite a lot of them are quite critical. They say, actually, that we're guilty of clickbait journalism. This is contributing to the toxic atmosphere of Parliament, because essentially what we're doing is we're putting big numbers...
Like, the absolute, temerity of someone who's getting donated tens of thousands of pounds by big businesses who do not have the interests of the public at heart, for trying to say that other people, that it's undermining the integrity of politics. No, you are undermining the integrity of politics by taking large sums of money in favour of political campaigning, right? By getting by doing favours for big business for money. You are the people who are undermining the integrity of the political system. For once in this country, we have a journalist actually trying to increase the integrity in politics for the first time in ages, right? So it's a ridiculous statement for a politician to make.
Numbers out there, and people might think that they're taking these sums in their pocket. Actually, I think Sky would argue that what we're trying to do is understand more clearly what's going on. Things are very carefully labelled in the public tool that you can access. But more generally, I think there's a conversation about money that sometimes MPs, not actually your next guest, Chris Bryant, but some other MPs perhaps shy away from. And
Imagination scene with a follow on Twitch, welcome.
And that doesn't help the debate. That doesn't help public understanding. And it's in the vacuum that's allowed to grow up that misunderstanding does happen. And it's that we're trying to challenge and to combat. And I think what is interesting is that we have done this exercise, but I think a little bit further...
It's really interesting just to see how different Sky News journalists are in the UK than they are in Australia. It's worth noting that UK's Sky News, which is part of Sky B, is owned by Comcast, which is who own NBC, I believe, in the United States. They're not owned by Murdoch, which you'd think with the name Sky, but a lot of British Sky stuff is not owned by Murdoch in the way that it is in Australia. And the level to which they engage in good journalism is completely different, right? Remember when we were watching yesterday, or the day before, I think it was? Sophie Ridge question Keir Starmer. That is the first time we've seen basic journalism being done to a good standard from any outlet in the UK, and it's Sky News that's doing it a lot of the time, which is a massive break from what Sky News is like in everywhere else that it broadcasts.
Further down the track, I think some in Parliament want to do this exercise as well. I think some MPs want a searchable, transparent database in the way that Sky News and Talks Media have produced this week. It's difficult, it's hard. We've shown it can be done. You can't do it without breaking a few eggs, but we've had a go with a public and transparent methodology and put it all up for everybody to have a look, to criticise, to have a play with. But I think what's really interesting is this starts to nudge along Parliament's process to doing it itself. That really would be...
That's the point. I mean, the point to make is it's not a witch hunt. This stuff is properly declared. This is an attempt for more transparency. That's the point.
Absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So let's bring in Chris Bryant, Chair of the Standards and Privileges Committee. So just, do you think...
Yeah, literally. I want to have corporations fund my career. That's it, right? They want to be able to get away with it. Just because it's in the rules, they can't defend it from some kind of moral perspective, which is my point entirely. The normative claim would be, it's bad to take donations from corporations because then you're beholden to their interests. Whatever the rules say doesn't matter.
That it is helpful to pull all this stuff together in one database to make it much more easy for the voters to understand.
Yes.
And why then?
Well done.
There were, so my question then is, if you think it's such a good idea, why haven't you or your committee or other MPs done it before this?
We've been trying to do this for the last 2 years. Every minute that I've been on, every meeting on the committee since I've been chair, there's one member in particular, Rita, who has been endlessly banging on the door of this and trying to get the ICT people here in Parliament to put together a system that works. So you can look at everything. You should be able to see everything that relates to an MP's registration of interest and everything that they have that goes to their constituency association rather than to them personally and so on. All of that.
He's mixed opinions on Chris Bryant. He's definitely one of the kind of Blairite kind of wing, but his politics and he does seem to be one of the few Labour MPs that, even though I disagree with him politically, does actually have at least some principles, which I think puts him slightly above the vast majority of the Labour front bench. Is he perfect? No. Do I like him? Meh. Is he better than a lot of Labour MPs? Yes.
the one flaw, I think, in your version is that it doesn't have anything from ministerial interests. So it looks as if backbench MPs are more involved in all of this than ministers, whereas in actual fact it may be, and that's partly because the government is shockingly bad at transparency. They produce, if you want to look at all the ministerial interests every year, you have to look at 320 separate documents online. And we've had a similar problem about that. Anyway, so apologies that we've been slow. We've been trying to get the House to make
Like, if you look at, the bar isn't incredibly low, yeah. Like, if you look at his register of interests, right, for example, what have we got? We've got stuff about the book that he wrote, and then columns he's done in the Daily Mirror and the Daily Express, bunch of magazine stuff, and then some other articles, and then appearances on the radio. So, as far as MPs go with regards to money that they're getting, everything what Chris Bryant does seems to be incredibly above board and reasonable payments, right? If you write a book, fair enough, right? If you're writing articles for a newspaper, fair enough.
It's number one priority, and it is now, and it was when we had a meeting in November, and I hope that by the summer we will have a fully all-singing, all-dancing system, but I want it to include the ministerial stuff as well.
Right. I mean, because on the face of it, MPs are saying to us, but it's already transparent. But when you delve into it, it's not really, as Sam found with this company, MPM Connect. We couldn't find the staff.
I didn't see about that one. I saw the other one, that you had
IX Wireless, but this is a company, I think, donating mainly to Labour MPs. Couldn't find the staff or website. We eventually found a secretary at the registered office who said she'd never heard of the two named individuals. So when you delve a bit deeper, it is still difficult to get to the kind of information that the public may want.
Yes, and there's an argument to say that two things, really. First of all, that the registrar in the House of Commons, with whom you register, if you've been to an event or you've had some outside earnings, the registrar is literally that, just a registrar. As they're constructed and as their office is constructed, they simply register things. They don't have the power to investigate. The Commissioner has the power to investigate, though that is always predicated on MPs cooperating with that process. And there is an argument to say that if you really want to make sure that this is all singing, all dancing, and all the transparency is out there, then you need to give the registrar a bit more power to be able to investigate. The other thing is, we could have a system where, at the moment, what you do is, I've just had a book advance.
Also, I would bet huge amounts of money. I say huge, but I would bet some money that Sky News had been sitting on this information for months, right? Especially or possibly even years, for example. And they just made sure they only released it in the new year when politics discourse was at some kind of lull, right? It would be very interesting that they probably wouldn't have released this, I say, during the many Conservative leadership contests that we had, because that would reflect poorly on people who might theoretically be becoming Prime Minister, when actually that would be the ideal time to release this stuff, when it is going to be most impactful upon the decisions that get made by the Conservative membership and or the Conservative MPs moving into seeing who chooses the new Prime Minister. I would bet that was the case. I have no confirmation on that, but that's just... We all know that news organisations will always release things at the most opportune moment.
I send an email to the registrar saying that it's from such and such person, I received it on such and such a date, there's so much time and so much money. And sometimes they'll come back to you and say, can you give us the address, and have you done this through your agent or not? But maybe we should actually have a system where you do it all yourself online, so you're entirely responsible for your own registration.
We're seeing your declarations on screen now.
Lovely.
You're quite happy with that?
Yeah, completely. I mean, transparency is the name of the game. I'm not ashamed of anything that's on there.
Well, the $7,000 from Qatar.
Well, yes.
Which you were critical of Qatar. No, well, I guess it's benefits, or went on a trip or something.
No, so, indeed, and indeed I've spoken about this, the trip to Qatar. I went to Qatar, the Qatari government paid for it. The Standards Committee, which I chair, we're looking at whether we should introduce a new rule to say that foreign governments can't pay for trips for MPs, that might queer the pitch with the relationship with the United States of America as well. But yes, so it was a trip to Qatar. I wanted to go.
It's like, with the US, right? Qatar, no, US, that's fine.
Because at the time they were the only extract place from Afghanistan, and I had 135 constituents or people related to my constituents who were possibly going out to that evacuation unit, and I wanted to try and help them. But if I'm honest, I hated the trip. I wish I hadn't gone.
You've just admitted a reason as to why it might actually be good for you to go to Afghanistan, so good for you to, if you go to Qatar, and now you're like, but I will definitely distance myself from the bad people.
And in the end, I think it's good for MPs to have good relations with other countries, but maybe we should be paying, the UK should be paying for it rather than other countries.
Right, we've got a couple of minutes left. Sam, do you want to, you might have to get this microphone
Yeah, exactly,
in.
JDM.
Is there a problem around disclosure and transparency? Look, the point is that MPs can take money from companies, right? And those companies can be quite opaque. Is there an issue?
So two things. Take money from companies, that's a big term. So there's, I think you're meaning donations to constituency parties and elections. So that's not money that goes into their own pockets. And I think it's important to disaggregate these things out. That's one thing. And of course, I think everybody needs to know where this money is really coming from. You may know in the Andrew Bridgen case recently, this was really...
You're right, Boy Meets Minnie, good to have you in chat. I hope you're doing well, keeping safe.
Quite a knotty problem about where the money was actually coming from, and we had to delve into it. And of course, he will be suspended tonight for 5 days from the House for being engaged in paid lobbying.
Is it too easy for MPs to take donations from companies and then for the company itself to be really quite murky, quite indistinct, very hard to trace the source of the money? And actually, because of that, we don't really have the transparency that we keep being told that we do.
I haven't come across that until you did this. So it's a well done you.
But it's almost like it's like no one's bothered having to look into this stuff. And it's also, it is incredibly dark and murky, and almost specifically so, right?
Sorry, I'm sounding really patronising. I don't mean it that way. I think transparency is in everybody's interests. Actually, I go back to a point I made earlier. The people you really want to know...
I mean, it's not in everybody's interest. It's not in the interest of the shady companies who want to get good deals from future governments.
Where the financial transactions are government ministers. If they're going off on...
Well, we may well get round to that.
Well, but that's the bit that's missing at the moment.
By the way, if you're enjoying the stream, please do consider becoming a member on YouTube. It is only 99p, cheaper than a can of Red Stripe. And if you'd like to subscribe on Twitch, it's $3.99. You get emotes for both, although more emotes on Twitch.
Because they're the people who actually make decisions. All I do is I shout at people who make decisions.
Yeah, well, we've spent months doing this, so yes. we'll
No,
I've got a point here. Things
and it may be that the House authorities need to come to you to look at what we can use from what you've done that might just shortcut the system so that we can do it more effectively.
There is
no, sorry, and I'm conscious I didn't fully answer Sam's question. Of course, it shouldn't be opaque. The whole point of the register is that it should be absolutely clear, and when anybody engages in their business as an MP, if they have a financial interest, they cannot lobby on behalf of that financial interest. Absolute rule. It's been there since 1695 in the Orphans Bill.
Right, and the changes that are coming in March, and paid work for MPs as parliamentary advisors and strategists and so forth.
All go.
Does that go far enough?
No, it could probably go further. I think some of us would like it to go further, but this is where we got to, because in the end the motion has...
Yeah, exactly. See what I mean? The man clearly has principles, right? Like, I disagree with him politically, but he has got the principles to say, no, there was a question that was being asked there and I've not fully answered it, right? Unlike Keir Starmer, who answers a different question and then Sophie Ridge doesn't even bother trying to prompt him to answer the question that was actually asked.
To be tabled by the government. I think that undoubtedly there are some people in the country who believe that no MP should have any second job of any kind whatsoever. I'm not sure that quite works, because everybody then goes, apart from a doctor or a dentist or a nurse, or maybe a farmer if they're in a rural constituency. Oh, and of course it's fine to write speeches and articles, or give speeches and articles and write books and things like that. So we found it really, really difficult to come up with a better system then. For me, the key issue is, if you have any kind of financial interest outside Parliament, do you abuse it, or do you abuse your position as an MP to pursue that commercial interest? Because that is a...
Hey, Lani with a follow on Twitch. Welcome to No Justice Stream. I hope you're doing well.
Conflict of interest. For me, that is the single most important part of everything that I've wanted to try and sort of clean up about. But you only get to know that if you have full transparency, and not, murky, cloudy transparency, full, unopaque. Opalescent, no, that's wrong. I don't know what word.
But just finally, should it be down to us and Sam and the tortoise and to do this? It should be down to you.
Yes,
you look after your own regulations.
But
it could have been done years ago.
Hey, Pickleby, good to have you in chat. Hope you're all right.
Well, I'm not sure. Our register, at least, you can go online and you can, if you type in Chris Bryant, Register of Financial Interests, it will all come up. And indeed, I think They Work For You has a version which keeps your previous register as well online. And there's an argument for us doing that in the House, so that it's all constantly collated. We've also changed the rule so that from the 1st of March, if you have an outside interest, you can't, that lasts, as it were, for 12 months rather than 6.
You also got to think as well, JDM, that he said, oh, no, I need to finish answering the question. It just shows, again, the level of journalism in this country, where they expect to not have their questions answered and then don't press when they don't give you the proper answer, right? Like, that's how low journalism in this country is, that it's actually the one time an MP actually comes and actually bothers answering the question, for example. It's not because they've been prompted by the bloody journalist, when the journalist should be prompting and saying, no, you've not answered my question. The fact that Chris Bryan is, Chad enough, as JDM points out, to actually go back and say, no, I've not answered it, it just shows that the journalist, again, is not doing their job properly by not prompting them to get the proper answer to the question that was actually asked.
At the moment. So we are tightening up the rules.
I'm aware
calls for more tightening.
I'm aware Peter Bottomley is here. So, in fact, we could actually just talk now to... Thanks very much indeed. Chris, yes, thank you very much indeed. Peter Bottomley, thank you very much indeed. Now, you're well qualified to talk about this, as not because of all your sort of donations and so forth, because I don't think there are that many. I think it's zero. But you've been in the House for...
Well, that's the problem, is, DeWolfie, is you're absolutely right. If they did give politicians a hard time, they wouldn't get any interviews. But they're only in that position because it's now being accepted that they're not going to ask MPs any hard questions, right? Like, if the whole culture from the start had always ask the tough questions to ensure that you get the proper answers, there would be no choice. MPs would have to subject themselves to scrutiny eventually. Otherwise, they would just get empty chaired the whole time. But now that the journalistic culture is such that most journalists don't give politicians a hard time, politicians can always choose to only go to those journalists, rather than there being an overall culture where they always give politicians a hard time, and then the MPs would have no choice but to subject themselves to it.
Or, 40 or 50 years, or coming up for 50 years. What do you think of this idea that we have done to bring all this onto one database so that the voter gets a better idea of what's going on?
It's a good idea to bring things together. I think the House ought to do more of it, or the House Library could do it. And if I may say so,
is this man a parody? Like, what's this man's accent?
Generally, if a politician criticises the media, better the other way around. I think you've made a bit of a hash of it.
In what sense?
Well, for a start, people who made donations to help someone get elected, it's not giving money to an MP, it's helping a normal thing. Yeah. Secondly, I think it's important that people are willing to contribute to political parties and political campaigns. And I think that, for example, when you have a leadership campaign, whether a Tory one or a Labour one, people need to be able to get in touch with members where they get that money from. As long as it's declared, as it is, I think you'll do better. And in fact, I think you've had more time...
Literally, it's always the fucking Tory who comes down and says, well, actually, it's good that we can have our campaigns funded by corporations, because otherwise, how would they ever get funded? And I'm like, there you go. You're just admitting that no actual people on the ground actually want to fund your campaigns. There's just no grassroots funding for any Conservative, and never has been since the dawn of time. I'm just let this play for 1 second. I need to go grab a drink and some painkillers.
You could have looked at Electoral Commission figures, and some of the mystery in some of today's door knocking would have been avoided, but that's part of some television. I think also you have people who can make an all-party group look as though it's odd, and some are odd, I can accept that. If I went through my own entry, I think there are 23 pages or paragraphs. You had to get a long way in to discover I had no donations to me or no outside earnings. You then got on to another 6 pages before you found that I was active in all-party groups, some of which don't have any outside funding. And then you get the figure of 2 million to those who do have outside funding, without any suggestion of whether there are things like the All-Party Group for Sexual Health, trying to make sure there are fewer antisocial diseases spreading, yes, or the All-Party Group on leasehold and common hold reform, which has no outside funding. So,
I think we'd admit, as Sam knows better...
Sorry, did a bit of a Hassan there.
We'd admit that it's not perfect, but it is probably better to try and do it than to not do it at all.
I think I would, if I may, pick up on one very important point. We absolutely, in this tool, you said that we conflate donations to constituencies. We absolutely make clear that we make clear that donations do not go into people's pockets in this tool, and that donations are there in order to support campaigns.
It doesn't matter whether the donations are going to the person or the campaign. At the end of the day, all it is there for is to be able to get people elected who are there to represent the interests and to gain policy concessions. It doesn't matter whether it's going to their pockets or their campaigns, because at the end of the day, it's being done to be able to get the same things back out of the donation, right? It doesn't matter.
And it says, that was the criticism.
I'm not attacking, and I'm not criticising. I'm saying
it was the point that you made at the start.
It could have been done better. In the same way, if you take an article from The Guardian on Saturday about John Stonehouse, the headline was that he was a Tory MP, helped make the way for other Tory students. In fact, he was Labour, it doesn't matter. On this thing, I think that if you had said to each MP...
We're not responsible for The Guardian.
No, I'm just helpful. Yeah. If you'd said to MPs, this is the information, here is the website to find it, and here's all your information together rather than going through 26 or 24 pages. If there's anything wrong, here is the phone number to ring or the email address. It made a number of my colleagues happier. I don't have any complaints. And even if I had interest or outside earnings, I wouldn't have a complaint either. Because I recognise the role of the media is to make available to all what's known to a few. Or if it's known in different places, how you put it together. So I accepted that and I welcomed that and I said, we ought to be doing it ourselves to make it easier for you. There are some other things where I suspect that a little bit of simple research or talking to an old fogey like me could have helped make the thing more practical and more useful to listeners and viewers. For example, one constituent, a serious constituent, came to me and said, how much you paid? Well, I'm very tempted to say, go back to the Sky website and you'll find the link where it says £84,000 if I took the full salary. So there are all sorts of ways one could make life easier, both for you as media, to those who listen and pay attention and concern.
That detail is on there.
I'll take, well, off air if you like, I can take you through my own entry, which I found, and you tell me which bits are relevant and who's going to spot the ones that they come to. It's not criticism, you're trying to do a very difficult job.
But your criticism, essentially, people aren't reading the captions. Is it our fault that you think that people aren't reading the captions?
If your editors would let you, I could actually open up the entry now and take you through page by page. But my main point coming on is to say, well done. What you're doing is important. The way you've done it could be improved. And I think if you did that, it would be more useful for your role in making information available to people, and also in checking whether people, like one or two foreign governments, are actually giving what would most people be seen as freebies to go somewhere interesting and pleasant, rather than doing some things which I used to do, which is to go somewhere unpleasant and dangerous. And for example, I nearly got killed in El Salvador at Oscar Romero's funeral. That was the all-party group on human rights.
Press F.
Party group, if someone had provided £25,000 and I was one of the three who went, that was like Peter Bottomley got £8,000 to go to Central America. Well, the fact that Martin Bell was standing beside me at equal risk, and so was his cameraman, and probably Sky were there too, wouldn't come
Actually, to be fair, I care less about people's donations from foreign governments precisely for this reason, right? In that you look at, for example, both Peter Bottomley and Chris Bryan got trips paid to go and do good things in other countries, right? That's fine, whatever. Like, I find that far less egregious than getting money from a private company, which can, under no circumstances, be for anything good other than policy concessions. Journalists should carry a supply of custard tarts and throw them when politicians lie or don't answer questions. True. Definitely.
So it's difficult. Yeah. The key point I want to make is do donate to political parties, do be open, and do make sure the information is available to all.
Quite, it's good for the system, good for votes and so forth. Very quickly, word on second jobs. Yeah. What do you think should be the position on that?
I think people misunderstand the second jobs issue. I don't have one at the moment. I'm at the sort of stage where I don't have need to, and my professional qualifications are a bit out of date. I was a fellow of the Institute of Personal Management a long time ago. What I think is you want to draw people into politics from all kinds of roles. So I had a friend called Peter Thurnham, who, when he was made redundant, bought 2 machine tools, built up an engineering business. Someone said, we need people like you in Parliament, and we certainly do. Should he have given up the business he built to come in? Should you have said to James Callaghan, when he was in his later stages, he was a farmer, you can't have a farm. Or Michael Foot, you can't have income from royalties. What I think is wrong is to use the House of Commons role, being an MP, as a hiring fair and go and get a job because you're an MP. I think that should be banned. It is banned in most ways. But to say to people, we don't want to be a practicing lawyer, or we don't want to be a practicing dentist, or we don't want you to be writing books, or we don't want you to... Anyway, a third of government MPs are ministers. That's a second job. So I think that it's not simple. I wouldn't go for the make myself popular and ban them. I would say invigilate and let people know about them. In fact, you could.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like even in America, right? Didn't Donald Trump, when he was president, wasn't he supposed to step down? Was to essentially furlough himself as director of Trump Enterprises to try and theoretically avoid some level of conflict of interest with his own company, which he then just pissed all over anyway. Right. Yeah. Like if you do build that business up, and then you become an MP, that's going to be a conflict of interest, yeah.
Say, if you're going to have a second job, in your election address, put down, I'm going to continue working as a X or Y or Z.
Okay. Well, look, it's good for you to come on. I mean, a few things you have a look at, but broadly, it's a good idea.
It's a good enterprise. Anyone wants to ask me how they can do it slightly better, I'd help them give my information for free.
OK, well, listen, thank you very much indeed. We better get a Labour view. Rebecca Long-Bailey is right behind you, so thank you very much. Sam, stay with us, because... well, I mean, Rebecca, what do you think of the, in principle, of bringing these things onto one database?
I think it's fantastic. I think transparency is long overdue. Of course, we've got our Register of Financial Interest, but it only goes so far in shining a spotlight on where donations come from and to what extent MPs are remunerated for outside activities.
Yeah, now we will very shortly have all your registered donations and so forth on.
Yeah, she's tiny, isn't she?
On the screen. Most of it, I think, has to be said. I think you're 11th on the list, am I right in saying, over 400,000. Most of it from the unions, in your case. I think Momentum as well.
Yeah,
was there
for the leadership campaign.
So
yeah.
This was for the leadership campaign. I mean, there's a lot of money from the unions. Do you think, broadly speaking, they get value for money?
They certainly do, and I think it's important to note that when we were going through the Labour leadership campaign, I wanted to shine a spotlight on party donations, and I asked all of the other leadership candidates to publish their donors list before they were expected to do so by the party, because I think it's important for our members and our constituents to understand who funds these campaigns, because that shines a light on what kind of MP you are and what kind of leader you were meant to be in the future. And of course, I was proud that all of my donations came from trade unions and Labour members who believed in what I was setting out as a vision. They wanted proper rights for workers, decent living wage, and to tax the super rich fairly so that we could fund our public services properly.
So Boy Meets Minnie, and for other American viewers watching, she was one of the 4 candidates for Labour leadership at the last Labour leadership election. So she went up against Keir Starmer in the fated leadership election where he lied about all his pledges so that he could beat her, right? A bunch of socialists voted for Keir Starmer because he put a bunch of socialist pledges because they felt, oh, well, if we're going to get socialist platforms from both RLB and Keir Starmer, then we'll vote for who we think is going to be the most electable, which they thought Keir Starmer was going to be. But then again, he decided he was going to ditch all of his pledges. But I'm hearing, again, I've got the centrist Liberal in my ear who's telling me that it wasn't actually lying, it was just good politics, so it's okay because it was at the expense of the left. So what do I know? But yeah, she's great. She's done really good work as the MP of Salford Eccles. In fact, Salford Eccles was one of the only constituencies. Remember on Super Thursday in 2020 at the local elections where Labour got pretty badly decimated at a bunch of local elections? Salford Eccles was one of the places that increased its voter share when they were actually supposed to lose a bunch of a bunch of local election council seats. Salford and Eccles got theirs increased. Preston did. Wales, Scotland, places where Labour did better than expected during those elections under Keir Starmer, because both the MPs in these constituencies and the councils do really good work. Her local politics is excellent. Would she have been a great leader? I'm not sure. I mean, maybe she would have been, but most of her donations, as they pointed out here, from the trade unions, which is Unite and CWU, and Momentum, which is an internal party faction within the Labour Party, was where all of her money came from, which is, again, people who donate to the Labour Party in the first place.
And it's also important to note on the issue of trade union donations that they are the cleanest money that can be found in politics. They come from democratic member-led organisations. The same can't be said of certain other donations that are made to various MPs that come from particular companies or particular individuals who have certain private interests.
But that's not to say that money from individuals and companies is not clean money. I mean, it's
not to say it's not clean money, but it comes with...
I mean, I'm saying that it's not clean money. If it's money coming from a massive corporation and its director, then it's definitely not clean money because it's money that's been extracted from the surplus value of their workforce. But then again, I'm pretty sure that whoever does Sky News, Mark Austin, I'm pretty sure he's not a Marxist, so...
With strings attached, shall we say. So trade unions donate to the Labour Party because they set up the Labour Party. It's what we all believe in as a trade union movement. For particular individuals and particular organisations, there could be strings attached. So, for example, Rishi Sunak received £530,000 as part of his leadership campaign. Over a quarter of that came from oil, gas companies and aviation individuals with particular interests. Now, there are no details as to what they expected from the Prime Minister when he became Prime Minister. But, of course, the question needs to be asked as to why we haven't seen the real action required on the energy crisis, why action hasn't been taken stringently enough on the super profits of big energy companies, and why we're not seeing the action on climate change that's needed.
Right, look, I just want to stick on this issue at the moment.
She calls it out. She just calls it out. Just like, Remember when he said he wasn't going to go to COP27 or whichever one it was? Just turns out he's been donated huge amounts by the oil and gas industry. Weird how they did this when they did the windfall tax. There were all these get-out clauses to avoid paying the tax in the first place. Strange how that just tended to happen from a prime minister who took loads of money from the oil and gas industry. Isn't that weird? Don't you find that strange as a coincidence?
And on second jobs, Keir Starmer seems to be quite clear that he wants to ban second jobs. He doesn't seem very clear about the instance of David Lammy, who has money coming in from speeches and media work and so forth. He didn't seem very clear at all about whether he should be stopped doing this work. So what is his view? What is his view? What is your view?
Well, my own personal view, I mean, I don't receive any external earnings outside my MP salary, and I think that being an MP is a hugely privileged position to be in. There aren't enough hours in the day to do your job as an MP properly, let alone take on a second job. So I would ban second jobs, and I think Keir was right to say that. Now, in terms of ambiguity, shall we say, there are arguments that are put forward that certain individuals should be allowed to keep up their professional qualifications. I was a lawyer. I chose not to do that because I wanted to give my all to my job as an MP, and I sacrificed my old career to concentrate solely on this one. But if you're a nurse, for example,
I think she would have done better in 2019, yeah, absolutely.
I don't think there's an argument to say that you couldn't, in your holidays, for example, go in and help out at your local A&E department. But when that becomes a diversion to your job as an MP, it's not right. So I would go forward saying that we need to ban second jobs for MPs categorically.
Sam?
Just following up on that. So do you think Keir Starmer should tell David Lammy to give up his media work, his speeches and his training?
Well, that's a discussion for Keir to have with David Lammy. But I don't think, my personal view is I don't think MPs should have second jobs at all.
So we've got some Labour MPs saying, well, it's already transparent, but it quite clearly isn't in the sense of this company, IX Wireless, that is funding some MPs. We've got the other one, MPM Connect, and they just don't seem to want to be upfront about what they're doing, who are they? We had to almost wrench it from MPs today. This is a problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem, and that's why this project is so welcome. And I think what we need to see going forward is a far more detailed register of interest, where we see who the donors are, who the individuals are behind the companies making donations, and their reasons as to why they're making those donations, because that's not often made clear. And then lastly, what that MP or that party is expected to do and what they'll use those funds for.
Okay, so just one more. Yep.
Today, Yvette Cooper, Dan Jarvis, Wes Streeting all came out and told us the details that we've been searching for weeks about the company giving to them. Why do MPs run away when we ask about money the first time? Why aren't MPs more upfront about the money men, the businesses? Should they pick up the phone? Should they answer journalist questions? Well, why did Yvette Cooper, do you think, issue a statement that said this is not for quoting?
I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for Yvette or her office, but certainly I don't think any MP should try and shy away from providing this information. It's hugely important and it's in the public interest. And I think if we had a more detailed register of interest, which went into further detail and provided the people behind the company names and the reasons for those donations and the way that money was spent, then I think that would provide a lot greater.
Yeah, I wish that she could say that too, right? Literally just respond because they want money from corporations to do the biddings of corporations, right? But she's cleverly skirting around, theoretically castigating her own fellow MPs from her fellow party by just implying it incredibly heavily with what she's saying, where she's saying, well, if we don't have explicit understandings in the register about what people expect to get from the donations and what it's going to be used for, how do we know that it's being done on a scrupulous basis? Which is, the implication is incredibly heavy that the other MPs are getting something back from the donations that they're being given without explicitly stating outright the members of my party are all corrupt, because we all know that it's true, right? But she can't obviously say it, otherwise she'll get Maxine peaked.
Greater clarity to the public when they were looking at the activities of their MPs.
I mean, you could become an independent MP. I mean, if I could win as an independent, then I'd be able to fucking run my mouth out 24/7, as you say, which would be good. We need more independent MPs. That's why I'm happy that in Australia at the most recent election, there was a huge swathe of independents.
Okay, Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Unfortunately, the closest we've had to an independent MP in the UK is fucking George Galloway. I'd rather have anybody else than George Galloway.
Your time. Thank you very much indeed. Sam, just a quick last word from you. So what do you make of what the MPs are saying?
Well, I think what's really interesting is just a great big sweep of views. You had Rebecca Long-Bailey there basically saying ban all second jobs, including David Lammy's. You had Peter Bottomley saying, look, it's important to have a diversity of thought, a diversity of occupation inside the House of Commons. And that's one of the big problems here. It's actually the subject of a very big party divide. The Labour Party in general want tighter rules. The Conservative Party, most of the outside earnings going to Tory MPs, 15 of the 17 million.
Isn't that weird? Don't you think that's a bit weird that somehow it's one specific party that gets the vast majority of their donations from corporations, right? Who want fewer rules, and another party who get most of their donations from the union movement want more rules. Isn't it weird? Doesn't that tell you something about the interests behind the policies that get crafted by these particular parties, about what they might want to have happen when they get it once they get into government? Don't you think that's very strange a coincidence? Well, that might be the ways in which these two parties might coalesce around a specific point of view on this. Also, someone clip that.
So that's one of the problems here. But there is a sort of bigger cultural thing. It's going to be I'm very interested to see whether the project to do something a bit similar to what we've done ever actually comes to fruition by the House of Commons. Because although Chris Bryant might want it, his Standards Committee might want it, there are people who are going to be nervous about having our kind of thing endorsed by Parliament. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether the attitude of MPs allows greater transparency in the weeks and months to come.
OK, interesting stuff, Sam. Thanks for being with us. And here's the QR code that you will want on screen now to use our tool and to discover how much money your MP gets on top of their salary, along with any others you may be interested in. It's all in the Westminster Accounts from Sky News and Tortoise Media. Now, this is a special edition of the News Hour. I'm at the very heart of Westminster today as MPs return. In the central lobby of the Houses of Parliament, MPs have been accused of failing to provide sufficient transparency after our Westminster Accounts investigation struggled to uncover basic details about who is behind major donations. The Director of the Institute for Government, Dr. Hannah White, joins me now. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And we've been focusing, Hannah, on the issue of donations today. And while on the face of it, it's transparent, when you actually delve down into the detail and try to get more detail, it's not so straightforward.
That's right, and I think this is a problem which is often the case with theoretical transparency around government, around Parliament. There can be an argument made, we put this data into the public domain. But anyone who's ever sat down, as Sky and Tortoise now have, with the Register of Members' Interests and tried to work out even what the declarations by an individual member mean, let alone being able to compare across parties or look cumulatively at the activities and the donations which MPs are undertaking and receiving, will attest to the fact that it is extremely...
Again, I know I point this out every time we do this, but please, for the love of God, if you're going to be on like a national news programme, please just get anything that isn't potato video and audio, right? Like Sky News has huge amounts of money. They could just get proper actual audio video equipment to these people that they're going to be having on as guests. It's not expensive to do this. Why are we getting fucking laptop camera quality video in this shit?
Difficult to interpret, and so that's why I think this project which you've undertaken is so important. But I think that the problematic thing is that for years the House of Commons has been...
We literally have kids who are literally making incredibly high audio video quality TikToks, right, on their little phone with an app, and we have representatives for government, we have representatives for business, we have representatives for institutions coming on properly funded news programs, giving us like Zoom conversations like they're using Skype in 2011. I'm sorry, how has it taken this long? And it just shows like how incredibly entrenched and technophobic probably a lot of the people who are part of the institutions are.
Saying that it recognises this.
I currently do use DroidCam.
And that it's going to do something about it, but it's never been a priority, and so hopefully...
Yeah, that's like a ring light's a fucking tenner at B&M. It's not difficult.
Project can help put some impetus behind actually those promises being fulfilled.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to do the database that we and Tortoise have managed to do over the last few months. It's quite another, as Sam was saying there just at the end, for the Commons to start doing something about it in a meaningful way. And you don't think, well, he didn't think the chances were that good, certainly in the short term.
Well, I think you've highlighted one of the key problems at the moment, because there is an imbalance between the parties in terms of which members are making the most from external donations and external activities, with the Conservative Party members receiving the bulk of that money and the Labour Party much less. while we have a Conservative government and Conservative MPs have a controlling interest in all the committees of the House of Commons who determine questions like this, the chances of this being prioritised for change are less good than they would be if the tables were turned and we had Labour government and Labour majorities on those committees. But I think there's also some culpability here for the...
It's incredibly frustrating that what will happen is, as Labour will get into government, they'll start getting more private donations from corporations because they have more power. And people will go, see, it's just about who's in power. And they'll forget to mention the fact that, the people who put Labour into power based upon the concessions that is given to corporations and the corporate media and all of that kind of stuff will be the people getting the donations at the end of the day, right? And that like, how many private donations did Rebecca Long Bailey get? None. How many did Jeremy Corbyn get? None. How many are they going to be getting? How many people like Richard Bergen are going to get? None, right? And they'll just say, well, it's Labour in government now, so the whole political system is fucked, rather than saying, no, it's specifically these people who always have their hands in the pockets of big business, who are the ones who get into power in the first place because the system is rigged in that manner, right? Which is why it's frustrating when trying to get Corbyn elected. It's like, same old Labour took us into the Iraq War. I'm like, Corbyn voted against that stuff, right? Because that's the problem with the corruption of the Labour Party and from base principles, in that having people like Keir Starmer, who are just career politicians, be at the head of the Labour Party, and having been part of the big Labour government of 97 to 2010, means that people do genuinely believe that both political parties are the same, because the people who get into power are the people who are happy to cozy up to the corporate class, which is the whole fault of liberal democratic capitalism at the end of the day, and it always tends towards power being given to people who are happy to make concessions to big business.
The House of Commons administration, because the register of members of interest is maintained by officials. The digital capability to improve
and this is why MPM Connect and all these other rich people donated to political campaigns for leadership to try and unseat Jeremy Corbyn, or to try and beat Jeremy Corbyn, is specifically because they wanted to curtail the ability of there being a proper opposition to their interests in this country. The corporate class deliberately tried to rig, through ability to be able to fund political campaigns, to try and ensure that there was no proper left-wing opposition in this country. They always do it, and they've done it forever, and it was incredibly obvious.
Machine readability, the accessibility of these entries that MPs make is something that the House of Commons administration could choose to prioritise and to take forward, because it is something that House of Commons committees have talked about doing. But it seems clear that a judgment has been taken that this isn't a political priority, and so that has not been prioritised on the administration side. And I think that, as I say, there's culpability, there's political culpability, but I think the administration could also have done more to say, well, this has been brought up by committees, it's something which we are going to invest in and take forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about Labour. We have found today some Labour MPs have been reluctant to give us more detail, more than they have to under current rules. Why do you think it is that MPs on both sides, to be fair, are reluctant to offer more detail?
Well, I think think about it from an individual MP's point of view, they probably are hoping that...
No, I don't get... Look at the MPs in Labour who are getting the donations. What do they support? What are their policy platforms? What have they been the people who've explicitly been engaging in the factional war against the left? It's not difficult. It's not about individual Labour MPs, they want to have a right to their privacy or whatever. No. The reason why is because they know, these Labour MPs know full well, that them being at the behest of a bunch of rich corporate owners and directors, right, that means that they are contrary, their vested interests are contrary to the stated goals of the Labour Party as the Labour movement, the democratic worker control of the means of production, distribution and exchange, right? They know full well it shows them to be the absolute gigantic hypocrites that they are, and careerists that they are, being in a party that's supposed to be pro-worker, whilst taking money from people who are have a class conflict with workers at the base, from base principles, right? That's exactly the reason why these three individuals, Dan Jarvis, Wes Streeting and Yvette Cooper, didn't want to properly have this scrutinised, is because it knows that it shows them up to have a skin in the game other than that which they are supposed to as members of the Labour Party.
Even if they have nothing to hide, they feel, explaining themselves on this sort of stuff isn't a big priority. They've got other more important political priorities, constituency priorities, and maybe if they ignore the annoying journalists for long enough, they'll just go away. It's not necessarily that they've got something to hide. It just doesn't feel like a high priority for them. But that's why I think that,
No, they do have stuff to hide. It's literally them hiding it.
The effort needs to be put in by the administration. And the political parties need to say, look, this actually is a priority for us. We want the public to be able to access this information, which, in theory...
Why do you think that the two MPs that were very happy to see the transparency were Chris Bryan and Rebecca Long-Bailey, and why Yvette Cooper and Wes Streeting were very hush-hush about it? Like, obviously Yvette Cooper released a statement afterward, which is better than Streeting, for example, who is an absolute rat and a snake, right? So, but there's a reason why RLB and Chris Bryant were absolutely happy for there to be the scrutiny, yet Wes Streeting isn't. Look at the difference between these two things, right? Communicat, thank you for the follow on Twitch. Welcome to the No Justice stream. Like, it's so obvious. It's so incredibly obvious as to why these particular MPs are getting the donations that they're getting.
It's in the public domain, but just can't be understood that easily. And so that is something that it should be made a priority.
And again, I would just like to point out anyone who's watching this who's only watched my channel for the first time and they're somehow an hour and 12 minutes into a video about me shitting on the Labour Party. I obviously hate the Conservative Party for the exact same reasons, but that's because my enemy is conservatism. My enemy is conservatism, not the Conservative Party, right? I don't care what colour rosette you're wearing. If you are pro-business, you're pro-corporate, right? I do not want to support you, and I will criticise you for it. The enemy is the ideology and not the party. I explicitly have already said in this statement, in this segment already, that the Conservative Party are worse than this. The vast majority of the biggest donations have all gone to the Conservative Party over this time. But that's the thing. It's stated in their goals as a political party that they are the party that explicitly panders to business, right? They're not the party for working people. They never have been. There's no hypocrisy from the Conservative Party in taking these donations because they are outwardly, they are incredibly forthcoming in their desire to fuck over working people and to govern in the interests of the super wealthy and the rich, right? People need to know that and understand that. And if you're a viewer who's watching who isn't particularly politically motivated but still wants to watch an hour and 15 minutes of conversation about politics, that is what the Conservative Party always has been, and you should understand that, right? But the Labour Party should not be this. The reason why I'm complaining so much about the Labour Party in this particular segment is because it is categorically against the interests of what the Labour Party should be. We now have, because of this money going into the Labour Party, promoting pro-business candidates, we now have an entirely pro-neoliberal political establishment. We now have no divergence away from neoliberal politics at the top of our political hierarchy, right? We now have, fundamentally, things will not change on both sides. We now have two political leaders who even Tom Harwood from GB News says are too similar. There is no... they're both agreeing with the same ideological orthodoxy, and both of which will not be positive for the country moving forward, especially not for working people. That is why I'm being so critical of the Labour Party specifically in this segment. But it should be said that obviously I despise the Conservative Party and everything they stand for, as Nicola Sturgeon would put it, right? But I don't expect them to be better. And as this comes from a left-wing person, obviously there are plenty of people out there who will vote Conservative and then attack Labour for doing things that Conservatives do. But they attack the Labour on the back of hypocrisy, but not off the fact that what they're doing is bad. I'm attacking both parties for it being bad, but for the Labour Party for being hypocritical for also doing a bad thing. Okay, I think that it is morally indefensible to take money from corporations under the assumption that you will give them policy concessions in return. I don't like it when the Conservatives do it. I don't like when Labour Party do it. But I also think that it is fundamentally wrong to also be hypocritical, to be a Labour Party member and also do it at the same time, right? There's an extra layer of hypocrisy that doesn't happen with the Conservative Party, but I would never, ever, ever support the Conservative Party, so, you know.
So that MPs don't have to think about it, MPs don't have to engage individually with journalists, because journalists, members of the public, anyone can just look at either the sort of tool that you've produced or a version of it, as you say, endorsed by the Houses of Parliament, which would just present this information. So,
but the thing is, Boy Meets Mini, is that the US Dems and the INC, for example, is that they're not supposed to be like properly leftist parties, right? I get it, and I would have those same criticisms in the same way I would have criticisms of the Conservative Party. But the difference is that in India and in the United States, like the Democrats and the INC are like the vanguard against fascism at this point, right? The political climate in both countries is so overwhelmingly hegemonic in favour of corporations that it's very difficult for leftists to break out of that. So I would understand people taking a more kind of pragmatic approach when trying to deal with corporate parties to try and stymie the threat of fascism, which is ever present in both the United States and in India. But in the UK, our second biggest political party is a leftist party. It is a socialist party, and that's why I'm so incensed by all of this. Whereas I would understand it in the case of the INC. Yeah, it's difficult.
It's not something they have to worry about.
Although it is true that if Nehru was looking at the INC like it were today, he would turn in his fucking grave.
Some tightening of the regulations on the way, as we were discussing a little earlier with Chris Bryant, and, you know, MPs being paid to act as parliamentary strategists or consultants is going to be against the rules. Do you think that goes far enough, or is there more to do on that?
Personally, I'm a little sceptical that that really goes far enough. I mean, yes, MPs will not now take jobs which are titled parliamentary strategist, but there are many ways to skin a cat and many ways to draw a contract. And at the end of the day, what the MPs have to make sure they're asking is, well, why is this company, this individual, offering to pay me a salary, to pay me an amount of money? What is it that they think they're getting from me? And if the answer is something which is by virtue of my position as an MP, then it's probably not appropriate. Just saying, you know, we can't take a job with this title, I don't think goes far enough. My personal view is that there ought at least to be limits on the amount of time that MPs can spend on outside interests. Where that amount of time, that limit is drawn, is a political question. But unfortunately, in my view, the view that the Standards Committee, chaired by Chris Bryant, took when they considered this question recently was that it was just too difficult to ask MPs to record the amount of time that they were spending on outside interests, and that was too onerous, and that therefore couldn't be done. My view is if they have...
What I would say, actually, someone mentioned this in chat the other day, and I think it's a really good plan, is I would just say that any money that you make from outside Parliament should be taken away from your MP's salary. If you earn more than £84,000 doing outside work, then we will not pay you an MP's salary, because that's not what the MP's salary is for. The high MP salary is explicitly there so that people who to make sure that anyone can afford to be an MP. Doesn't matter what background that you come from or what other interests that you have. If you become an MP, you will always get some. You always are able to survive on that income, regardless of where you are, what you do, and what situation that you're in. And it's actually incentivize poor people to become MPs to fight for the needs of poor people. Right? No one's becoming an MP as a rich person for the salary, even at £84,000. I dare say, it's there to ensure that regular working people will be able to incentivize them to get into politics. And I think that's a good thing. And if that salary isn't there for rich people, take it away from them. Just take it away, right? If you want to earn money outside Parliament, whatever, but you're not going to get paid from Parliament to do it.
Have the time to spend on outside interests. They should have the time to document the time that they're spending.
And where do you think we'll end up on second jobs?
So, I mean, I think, you know, as you say, the rules have just been tweaked around second.
What's frustrating about Indian politics as well is when you look at the record that CPIM have in Kerala, I actually think they do a really good job in governance. But when you look at people like Yechury's opinions on foreign policy and stuff, because his criticism, like both, but Yechury has really good criticisms of people like Modi and the BJP all the time. Actually, I think his criticisms are really, really salient, but they're fucking tankies. Like when it comes to other stuff.
Jobs. I think that many members of the public would be surprised at how limited the change has been after the Owen Paterson affair. There was a lot of outrage about the amount of time that certain members were spending on outside interests, and the House of Commons passed a resolution to say it was going to place limitations. Now, I think most members of the public listening to that would have thought that those limitations would have been going further than just a restriction on taking jobs entitled parliamentary strategist. And I think the next time a scandal emerges in this space, and it will, the public will be further disillusioned when it discovers that an undertaking that the House of Commons gave to sort this out for itself has been quietly shelved.
OK, Hannah White, thank you very much indeed for coming on this evening, and thanks very much indeed for helping us with what we're trying to do. Appreciate it. So there we are. It's the Westminster Accounts. It's on the Sky News website. Much more coming up. This is the new...
And that's the end of that anyway. So yeah, I don't think I can add in much onto what that segment, as I already said. But if you did enjoy the segment, please do like, follow, and subscribe. Consider becoming a member for 99p if you're a long-time viewer of the channel to help support keeping the stream live. And thank you for everyone who's viewing on this Twitch live as well. Cheers, guys. And I'll catch you on the next segment.